Oh, hey, this podcast is sponsored by the newsletter Pitch Club, the monthly Substack where you read cold pitches and hear the authors audio annotating their thinking behind how they sold and crafted their pitches. It could be how to pitch an agent, an editor, a feature, an essay, a source. Welcome to pitchclub.substack.com. Forever free, man. You read a little, you listen a little, you're going to learn a lot.
And so much of my writing life has been not writing. Right. And I don't know if others of you suffer this, of like, I have the project and then I am sitting there staring at the blank screen and this is the thing that I've only wanted to do, and yet I can think of all of these other things that I'm doing instead.
Kicking off the live podcast cycle, our first of the year with Daniel Pollack-Pelzner, author of Lin-Manuel Miranda, The Education of an Artist. It's published by Simon & Schuster. It's recorded at Gratitude Brewing in Eugene, Oregon. Thank you, Gratitude. In partnership with the Northwest Review, a revitalized lit journal for the Pac Northwest. It's happening. We're still doing them, man. This is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, the show where I talk to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. Been at this game since 2013. How the hell are you? Okay, but listen, though. Of the many things I love about this show and its ethos is that it's 100% independent. I saw something on Instagram about a podcast that, partnered with someone else, and I was just like, I don't give a fuck about that. There's no media company or institutional backing to CNF Pod. I have no partnerships with publishers. Everything's a reflection of my taste. Every decision is based on serving you, the listener, and if I'm being honest, a bit of myself. The show doesn't really make any money, and that's okay. It'd be cool if it made a few $1,000 a month, because that would really cut me loose to do the things in my brain folds. But one of these days, we can dream. But I love that the buck stops with me and me alone. I curate, I edit, I write everything. I don't outsource a second of the labor. I'm not sure why I wanted to reiterate this point, but it's something I'm proud of, that I'm not part of a network. Even if that network could put the show in front of more people. We'll get there. When people find the show, they stick around. They realize I've got good shit in the refrigerator. Show notes of this episode and more are at brendanomeara.com, where you can find off-kilter blogs. If you care to support the show with dollars and cents, you can go to patreon.com/CNFpod for a host of cool perks like the Flash 52 sessions. If you know, you know. The show's Instagram is at Creative Nonfiction Podcast. Blah. So Daniel Pollack-Pelzner, the Notorius DPP, is charismatic as he is brilliant. Maybe some of that seasoning rubbed off on me. One can dream. Man. Teaches English and theater at Portland State University. He received the Graves Award from the American Council of Learned Societies for outstanding teaching in the humanities. Can I read? His work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, and The New York Times. Dude, I need some of these bylines. People think I'm a jabroni, and they wouldn't be wrong. Want to know how sickening Daniel is? He has a BA in history from Yale and a PhD in English from fucking Harvard. Gross. Ew, right? Ew. You can learn more about Daniel's disgusting intelligence and equally freaky contributions to the culture at danielpollack-pelzner.com. And follow him on Instagram at Daniel Pollack-Pelzner. This conversation was so lively and great, and we talk about how he pitched Lin-Manuel Miranda, the Hamilton guy, on being his biographer. Being driven by curiosity, having to earn scenes, the fun of it framing, balancing salt, fat, acid, heat, maintaining a sense of play with the work, what Daniel learned from Lin-Manuel, and taking the harsh feedback from trusted readers in stride. It really is amazing stuff. So it's high time we cue up the montage fuck ice riff.
I go 3 days without writing. I feel fucked up and, depressed.
I like to write books that sound more like someone telling a story over a campfire.
Then you got to keep moving on because tick, tick-tock.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
As I look at all the wires behind me and everything on here, and it is so disorganized, and this is a perfect distillation of my brain. To write books and to write anything, you have to be somewhat organized. And how do you just keep things straight so you can do the work that we expect of you?
Oh, man. It is indeed a challenge and a thrill when you get to enter somebody else's life to try to keep that life straight. Yeah. And this is like last 4 years have been interviewing, I guess, about 150 different people and traveling from Puerto Rico to New York to Wesleyan University and other places. So I'm like, this like we want to talk like logistics. I had Scrivener program on my laptop. I had a chronology of Lin-Manuel's life where everything I learned from his first kiss as a like a 7th grader at Hunter College High School to his first Tony Award would get entered into the document, and then every interview I did, every transcript would go in there as well. And it slowly started to accrete from a kind of giant brain cloud into a story that I hope could put this in an order.
Right, and writing a book is such a marathon, or even a long magazine piece. It's so much more marathon than sprint. And there is this tendency to feel like you can't get your head around it. So how do you get your head around it so that you can build, that you are building something drip by drip, and eventually that bucket fills up?
You're absolutely right, Brendan. I hadn't anticipated this because I'd been writing magazine pieces that were like 3,000, 4,000 words, and I sort of thought like that's a unit I can kind of keep in my head. And then the publisher said 100,000 words for this book, which at the time seemed like an unsurmountable, pinnacle to reach. Now, I think we were probably both in this situation of turning in far too many words for the first draft.
Oh, big time, yes.
To scale back. But I was like, I can't keep a project of that scale in my head the way that I'm used to keeping the smaller units. But that for me was actually the thing that helped make the mountain feel scalable. It was like, okay, I don't know what 100,000 words is, but if I do my math right, if I divide that by 20, that's like, 20 chapters of 5,000 words, I can do each of those. Mm-hmm. And so I just started thinking in those units. I mean, I'm a Shakespeare professor by training. I wanted this not to be a Shakespeare professor book. I wanted this to be like a 90s YA coming-of-age story that happened to be true. And the organizational principle for me always was like, what is Lin-Manuel's emotional state at the beginning of this chapter, and where's he going to get at the end of the chapter, and what's he going to learn over the course of that journey? So I tried always to know, like, what's the last line of this chapter going to be? That I can hold in my head, and then try to write to that line to get us to that emotional arc. Yeah,
that's such a good point to underscore. And when I was reporting The Front Runner, and given that Steve Prefontaine is no longer here, and today marks his 75th birthday, I was always asking his friend, like, where's his head at? Where's his head at? Where's his head at? And interviews I've read with Vince Gilligan, the creator of Breaking Bad, they were always interrogating, where's Walt's head at? Where's his head at? And I always found that to be a good guiding principle for the reporting. And I imagine, for you, when you're, be it a magazine profile or something as ambitious as what this biography would be, is that you are constantly trying to get into that headspace as much as you can to really reveal that interiority that allows us to sink into a story.
It's exactly right. Yes, because I think like what we all want to avoid is the sort of Wikipedia entry version of our subjects, right? And I think it can be challenging when you're writing about somebody, like Prefontaine, who's this world historical athlete, or Miranda, who's like created the form of musical storytelling in the 21st century. How do we make them human, struggling, frustrated, fallible, taken wrong turns along the way to their successes? And I got to do a shout out here. This is a total surprise and delight in the audience. We have the daughter of the nurse at Hunter College High School, Elaine, who was Lin-Manuel's guide throughout high school, because he was suffering so many anxieties and senses of insecurity and neuroses over being surrounded by tremendously talented classmates who had tested into this Upper East Side magnet school, as you did yourself, that he was just always in there with a headache or a stomach ache. And I sort of felt like, okay, that's the Lin-Manuel I want to start writing with, the one who doesn't feel like he is singing to Barack Obama to launch his new musical, but the kid whose tummy is hurting because he can't do math as fast as Arthur Lewis in his seventh grade homeroom class. And then by the end of that chapter, I want him to go from lost to found when a teacher sees his potential and introduces him to the peers who can help him.
And when it comes to writing a book, or again, I always bring it back to long articles or a book or chapters, it always helps to have some degree of practice, around the writing, something to warm up the engine, gin up the engine, so that you can sink into the work. So what's the practice by which you like to start a day so you can have what you deem maybe a successful day at the ledger?
So much of my writing life has been not writing. Right. And I don't know if others of you suffer this, of I have the project and then I am sitting there staring at the blank screen and this is the thing that I've only wanted to do, and yet I can think of all of these other things that I'm doing instead.
Yeah, the sink is so full of dishes.
Exactly.
I need to clean these now.
Right. This was the self-help guide I got in grad school was called "Why Do Grad Students Prefer to Clean the Bathroom Floor Than Write Their Dissertation?" And I was sort of dreading that with a book. I'd never thought I would write a book. It seemed like torture to have that big a goal to try to finish. It seemed like running a marathon to me, incomprehensible. But for me, it was really driven with curiosity about my subject, and I spent a year and a half doing nothing but research and interviews, and so then the thrill each day was who do I get to talk to? Mm-hmm. And some of it was people I'd heard of before. It was wow, I get to learn from Andrew Lloyd Webber today about how to write a musical, and some of it was people that I'd never heard of, and it was oh my God, I'm talking to Lin-Manuel's elementary school bus driver who's going to tell me about his son who drove the bus, who was an aspiring hip-hop artist and would try out his material on the fourth graders sitting on this bus, and this is how Lin-Manuel learned to rap from Dwayne Baker on the ride. So that was its own thrill. I don't know if others of you are like this. I use research to procrastinate writing. So I'd be oh, okay, I've interviewed all these people. I also need to talk to, how can I possibly write this book if I haven't talked to the assistant director for Lin-Manuel's 12th grade production of West Side Story? Surely Rebecca Podolsky has invaluable information that I can't write the book without. And shout out to Rebecca, she did. But it got to the point that my wife said, shouldn't you just start writing something so that this deadline is not going to slip away? And then to my surprise, once I started in on the writing, started in with 7th grade Lin Insecure, I had so much of a vicarious thrill about imagining myself into the worlds that I was learning about, that I was just looking forward to it every day. And it was a type of writing that I felt I hadn't done since I was a kid, writing imaginary worlds, because this happened to be a real one. And I would, to my surprise, look forward every day of okay, today I'm going to get to meet Stephen Sondheim through Lin-Manuel, or today I'm going to get to go to the White House, or today, finally, the musical's going to open on Broadway. And that became its own thrill, to the point my wife said, shouldn't you just not write anything today and pay attention to the rest of our family instead?
Well, there's an element, too, when you're doing a lot of research, and you start to eventually feel that deadline sitting on your chest, and it's no bueno. But there comes a point where you need to start writing maybe before you're ready. And what was your experience with that, just being oh, yeah, you know what, I can still do both simultaneously, but I better get some words down because otherwise this deadline is going to suffocate me.
That is true. That is true. And that was an ominous loom on the calendar. My dad's an artist, and I always grew up with these. He had this Rembrandt poster above the guest room in our upstairs attic where I would be relegated when the grandparents would come to town. And it was this beautiful Rembrandt drawing, and along the edges of the poster were all of these little sketches that Rembrandt had done of minor figures in the picture, and it was just an arm or an elbow. And I was so intrigued by that Rembrandt would have to just kind of warm up on the elbows before he did the whole thing. And so I tried to do little sketches of things, scenes that I knew would be part of the book, just to sort of test out my material. So there's this moment when Lin-Manuel's hero, composer Stephen Sondheim, one of the great musical theater composers of the 20th century, shows up in Lin-Manuel's high school because his writing partner had a daughter a couple years below Lin-Manuel, and this is what happens when you go to school on the Upper East Side of New York in the 90s. And Stephen Sondheim comes to the drama club and tells the kids who are putting on West Side Story what it's like to write West Side Story. And so I knew this was going to be a set piece in the book, and I'd interviewed like 12 different people who were in that room, and I knew what color Sondheim's sweater was and what chair he was sitting in, and I'd visited the room at the high school and seen its windowless sort of ignominy that was going to be illuminated by this luminary presence. And so I thought, okay, if I can write that scene, then that'll be my elbow in the margin. That'll be my little test case of whether or not I had enough material. And then I started writing oral histories of episodes in the book, of like just basically quotes strung together to tell this story. Because my fear initially was, am I going to have enough material? Am I going to be able to excavate enough of things that people remember from 20, 30 years ago? So I just wanted to take all the quotes I had about the first movie that Lin-Manuel made when he was a 14-year-old eager to emulate Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez, a movie called Clayton's Friends, that his high school classmates were thrilled to get on IMDb and then couldn't get off IMDb afterward. So I wrote like a 20-page oral history of Clayton's Friends because I knew nobody had written about it before. And I also wanted to give Lin-Manuel a kind of proof of concept of what I was doing with all these interviews that he was connecting me with and learning. And I loved doing it, and I shared it with people, and they said, okay, this is fun. Everyone who was in Clayton's Friends liked it. Everyone else who wasn't was like, please don't write the book in this format. We don't know who any of these people are. And then I learned that actually the task of writing the book was not accumulating, but was going to be winnowing down from that initial material. But for me, the oral history format and the little sketch in the margin was what sort of lowered the barrier to entry and let me think, okay, I can get into this world.
And so much of nonfiction writing is about pitching, be it pitching editors and pitching sources. And you had to pitch Lin-Manuel, who probably had he could have written a memoir, he could have written some degree of collaboration for some sort of a authorized biography of that nature, ghostwritten. But you were able to curry favor enough to really biographize him through this rubric of his education and his constant prolific learning. So what did that pitch look like to get him on board to let you write about him?
It was a total cold call email with a shameless subject line, "Who tells your story?" that I cribbed, and I was a little nervous sending it. I'd moved from Shakespeare to contemporary playwrights about 10 years ago. I'd seen Hamilton and been smitten by it like everybody else in 2015. And I'd covered the show as it had gone around the world in London and Puerto Rico. I'd interviewed Lin-Manuel, press conferences a couple of times. And the first time I met him, I had just written a piece about the history of blackface minstrelsy in the Mary Poppins books and stories when Mary Poppins Returns came out. And so I was introduced to him, and I said, "Hi, I'm Daniel." And he said, "I know who you are." And I thought, this is not going to go.
Yeah, that sounds ominous.
But it turned out that one of my singing friends in college had been in his high school a cappella group. And in fact, they'd been arrested together at the 96th Street subway station for singing Billy Joel without a permit, which I think may still be an offense in New York City. So we had some friends in common. It turned out my college history professor, Joanne Freeman, who'd written a book about Hamilton, was a historical advisor on Hamilton the musical. So I think those things sort of smoothed the gears a little bit. And his high school girlfriend had actually been in a play with me in college. So I think we had enough common points that I wasn't just the guy trying to dredge up weird cultural history for publications. And then I really wanted to write a book for my students who wanted to have lives in the arts and didn't have a kind of clear pathway to follow. And he really wanted to honor his teachers, and that was something that drew me to him as a subject. Like, he always talked about the teachers who inspired him and helped him develop as an artist and what he could learn from his collaborators. And I thought that, for me, was a way out of either just lauding him or faulting him, was like trying to understand how did he learn to become the artist that he is. And so he said it was the teaching pitch that made him open to it.
Right, yeah, and it's so key to biography is the framing. And how did you eventually kind of settle on that framing of this grace note of learning and education throughout the entire narrative? Like, what was the light bulb moment? Like, oh, this is how we can use him as a vector to tell his story, but through his mentors and through this addiction to taking on a skill to learn something new.
Right. It was a dog walk. I don't know if you guys think best when you're when you're moving. For me, like that's often the engine for it. So that I was fortunate. I mean, these are circumstances that I wouldn't advise replicating if you want to write a book. In my case, it was being fired from a former university position and then filing a lawsuit against my former employer. And one of my mentors called me up and said, "You have to write a book to distract yourself from litigation." Yeah. And at the time, I thought, "Oh God, is there anything worse than litigation? To be writing a book, that would be just misery every day." But he said, "It's a Shakespeare guy." He said, "Nobody cares about Shakespeare anymore. Write a book about this guy, Lin-Manuel Miranda. You've been stalking around the world for the last decade." And the minute he said it, it like clicked. Like, oh yes, I am curious about this person, and what I'm curious about is how he learned to become an artist, because he's always a bright and curious and talented person. But I think most people who went to elementary school with him or even high school with him would say he was this nuclear reactor of creativity, but he was not the best singer in his cohort. He was not the best writer, the best composer, the best musician, but he had this astronomical learning curve so that he figured out how to soak it up from everybody around him and how to collaborate with everybody around him. And I thought on this dog walk, I was like, oh, that's what I want to write about, is how he learned to become an artist, so that I hoped for my students it would sort of break away from the kind of, I think, fixed mindset that a lot of us have about creativity, of like either you're born with it or you're not. And like he was born with a desire to do it, but without the skill set, and he acquired it. And I hope that could become, not a blueprint, but a kind of mindset that my students could learn from too.
Yeah, and something in the book too, he was always willing to go slow to then go fast. And you can tie this concept to him, but also to you in your development as a writer too. Like, I think a lot of us really want to just try to get on this rocket ship, and we might be looking over our shoulders at people that might have a leg up elsewhere, but sometimes it does take the growing pains are part of the journey, and then like once you take your lumps for a while, then things start to accelerate. And I think Lin was a lot like that in being able to go slow to eventually get on that rocket ship. So maybe just what about that struck you about his story, and maybe even your own?
Well, you're right. I mean, he was a guy who was writing his first musical when he was a junior in high school, so he was getting in there early, but he didn't suffer from the feeling that I think. But I do, and I think a lot of emerging artists do, of comparing your own work to the work of the people that you idolize, and then feeling kind of crippled by, I guess Ira Glass calls it the taste gap.
Sure.
Like, when I'm starting out, it's not going to look like this. Yeah. His hero when he was in high school was Robert Rodriguez, who's part of that like 90s sort of indie filmmaking scene. And Rodriguez wrote this memoir called Rebel Without a Crew that Lin-Manuel read in high school, that said, you go to screenwriting school and they'll tell you write your first 3 screenplays, then you throw them out because they're not going to be any good, and then write your 4th one and maybe it'll be good. And Rodriguez said, that's bullshit. Make your first screenplay with your friends on like a home camcorder for no money. Like, he actually went and sold his plasma for money, which I don't necessarily recommend. And you'll learn by making it. Yeah. And Miranda totally adopted that. He was like, I know I'm not going to make Citizen Kane the first time out, but I'm going to make something. And that iterative process is going to make it better. So that helped free me from the sense of like I had to nail it the first time out. And his high school girlfriend had shared the first draft of Lin's first Broadway musical, In the Heights, which began as a show that Lin-Manuel wrote as a sophomore in college, and that's sort of the lore around it. And so I read the script for the sophomore in college production, and it was delightful. And there was not a single word or song or phrase from that sophomore year production that made it 8 years later into the Broadway production, except for the title phrase in Washington Heights. And so that freed me from the sense that like masterpieces don't spring fully formed from their creators' heads. You put down what you know at the time, and then you go through the process that Lin-Manuel really loves of sharing it with collaborators and getting their input on what would improve. And I tried to follow that too.
Yeah, I love you bringing up the taste gap, and there's the famous Ira Glass meditation on that, and the taste gap about like where your taste is and your where you want to go, but in between there is a lack of ability to get there, and it's about the accretion of that skill to do it. Yeah, and there's a moment too, like Lin-Manuel wasn't inhibited by the gap between what he could create and the work of professional artists he admired. And then there was someone, a friend of his and a peer of his, Alex, said, a lot of us fall prey to the taste gap, feeling that we'd never play like some great band. A lot of us made ourselves give up, but Lin was never like that.
Yeah. That to me was like an amazing insight into his generativity. Is like one of his collaborators in Hamilton, Renee Elise Goldsberry, who played Angelica Schuyler in the original Broadway company, said like the artists she knows are either show and tell artists. The minute they create something, they just want to share it with people and then they're done with it. Or they're perfectionists and they will never share it because they're always trying to fine tune it a little bit sharper. And she said Lin-Manuel is a show and tell perfectionist. Like the minute he makes it, he's showing it, and you can go on YouTube and watch him as a 4-year-old dancing to Footloose on his bedroom. And he also embraces like the process of revision, and he was willing to throw out the central plot of his college version of In the Heights when producers gave him feedback about what could make it better. He'd throw out the first song he wrote for Hamilton's wife, Eliza Schuyler, because his own wife said, not your best work. And so I thought that was amazing to both have that sort of lack of inhibition about creating your work and also that willingness to take that feedback. And I was getting it hard from my family members. I remember my dad reading an early version of the chapter about Lin-Manuel in college. He said, Daniel, your mom and I both found this very boring. He said, perhaps we're not your target audience. We don't read celebrity biography. Maybe celebrity biographies are just supposed to be boring. And I was like, oh, okay, take a beat. Say more, Dad, about what you're... And he's like, there's all this 90s hip-hop, and I don't care about that at all. He's like, but then you mentioned Ira Gershwin, and I was briefly interested in that part. So I thought, okay, this is good feedback. Like, if I want readers beyond the folks who went to high school with me and Ruby, I got to have some on-ramps for folks who have not been listening to, Biggie and to Green Day all of their lives. And, like, that's the kind of feedback Lin would get. It's the kind of feedback I tried to internalize as well.
Oh, my God. That reminds me, like, when my first book came out, 6 Weeks in Saratoga in 2011, and I had given a completed manuscript to my father around Christmas 2010. On Christmas Day, he called me back, and I'm just expecting your typical Merry Christmas thing. He was just like, I read your book, and I just found it tedious. I was like, you motherfucker. I'm like, I'm never sharing anything with you again. And I didn't. So
Taught him a lesson.
Exactly. But there was also a moment, too, in the book where his collaborator and actor, Eileen, she says, and she's talking about On Borrowed Time, which is, kind of a weird concept thing that Lin didn't bend on certain things when he got certain notes about it. But she did say that, like, all the best mistakes he ever made were in there. And I think there's something to be said there about being fearless about making mistakes, be it in music or writing or playwriting. It's just like you need to learn how to just be kind of fearless and then learn and ideate from there. And a lot of us, I think, block ourselves before we allow ourselves to do bad stuff to get to good. We just want it to be good.
Yes, it's so true. I found that particularly in college myself, of like, I have this image of what I want my writing to be, but I know the minute I start writing, it's not going to be as good as that. Right. So I'm not going to write anything so that I can tell myself that my idea is still perfect, which is a terrible way to create anything. And Lin-Manuel had to learn, just as you're saying, how to get feedback. He did have this weird idea for a senior thesis project, which was a sci-fi romance time travel musical in which he could redo a bad breakup with his high school girlfriend by coming back as somebody on his deathbed to undo their breakup and also have an affair with his high school girlfriend. And everybody was like, what? That's a terrible idea for the show. But he really wanted to do it, and he did it. And he says to this day it was a disaster, and he has a pit in his stomach from remembering it. And he learned from that to start listening to people and to figure out that tricky balance of like when you do trust your gut. If you tell people I'm making a hip hop musical about Alexander Hamilton and people say that's a terrible idea, when do you go with it? And when are they actually saying like, okay, you have a concept, but I don't you're not helping me connect with what its central premise is, and like that's useful feedback to get. And he'll always say, when he's sharing work, it's like, what's the gap between what's in my head and what you're receiving, and how do I try to shorten that gap? And so I found that too, of like, I'd write scenes that I thought were hilarious or heartbreaking, and people would say, why is this in the book? And then I'd have to say, okay, I haven't earned that scene yet. If I want it to stay in the book, I have to figure out how to back up and get people on board with it.
Right. I love hearing you say that. How do you earn that scene? So how do you earn scenes that you don't want to see on the cutting room floor?
Right. Well, that's where that education frame came in hard, was like, there were so many stories that I just loved hearing and that I thought were fun and that I was thrilled that I was excavating in the research process. And I mean, I remember like I spend all day on the phone or on the Zoom with somebody I was talking to, and then make dinner, and my kids come home from school, and I remember telling my kids, like, I just found out Lin-Manuel's freshman year roommate at Wesleyan was also into making film and also into hip hop, and so they put a poster on their dorm room wall of Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen from Full House, and wrote Lin-Manuel above one of the twins and Josh above the other twin. And then at the end of the year, when Lin-Manuel moved into the Latino Cultural House, they ceremonially cut the poster in half, and each of them took half of it. And my teenage daughter looked at me and she said, "Oh, Dad, you should put that in a folder called Nobody Cares." And I thought, okay. Not everything I learn will be in this book. And then the question became, what is Lin-Manuel learning from this story? And if he's not learning anything from it, even if it's fun, it's got to go in the like deleted scenes at the end.
Oh, that's great. There's a moment too where I think he said, I think a part of my brain is always just trying to make the best school play. And I love this element that even as a professional, he's hearkening back to the things that brought him joy and inspiration from his development, from his adolescence. And it just, for a lot of us, I think we lose that sense of play. So like, how have you maintained that sense of play, or maybe drawn inspiration from his sense of play to your own work?
Ooh, that's a fun question. Well, something I've noticed when Lin-Manuel talks about his work, he always says, like he's talking about something that's really difficult. How does he consolidate a 700-page Ron Chernow biography into a 2.5-hour musical? And he'll always say, like, instead of saying, like, the burden or the challenge or the overwhelm of it, he'll always say, the fun of it was, how do I try to compress 200 pages into an opening number? And I thought, okay, that's like a cool framing to have. And maybe it's a little bit of a psychological gimmick, but I would think to myself, okay, the first half of the book, I was like, I've got all these characters. How do I get the readers interested in any of them when they're all like, there's Alex Lacamoire and Alex Horowitz and Alex Sarlin, and I know the difference between all of them because I've met them, but they're just names on a page. How on earth, why isn't everybody tracking these? And then it became like, okay, the fun of this chapter is I'm going to introduce somebody new, and I'm going to give them a superpower, and I'm going to help people thrill to them. So I tried to adopt that little, kind of fun of it framing, and just like remember what made me fall in love with the project in the first place, and think like, I love this work. I'm excited to dive into it. I get to share it, and I hope that enthusiasm can come across on the page.
Yeah, and as a Shakespeare scholar, you were in the prologue. You were looking to who are today's Shakespeares, and over the decades and certainly the centuries, there have been talented playwrights that have come along, but no one has really embodied maybe that next Shakespeare. But Lin-Manuel seems to, maybe more than anybody else, embody sort of that spirit. So what do you think it is about him that maybe makes him the sort of the inheritor to that mantle? Well,
we'll see. I feel like we sort of have to wait 400 years and see if he becomes that figure down the line. But there's the metaphor that so many people I talked to used was Lin-Manuel as a sponge. Mm-hmm. Like he just soaks up everything that he encounters. And so there are a lot of chapters about him writing these songs in his shows, and like he's drawing on Jay-Z, and he's drawing on Sondheim, and he's also drawing on Dr. Seuss to figure out how to use a funny rhyming rhythm to avoid the stress on the ultimate syllable of the line. Or he's drawing on like a Will.I.Am setting of an Obama speech. Or he's drawing on a story that a castmate has told him. Or he's drawing on the memory of losing a childhood friend in preschool. And Shakespeare too, you can just see like everything in his world is material for him to use. And Lin-Manuel told me the first time we met that his mom, who's a child psychologist, had given him this framing for his work, which was that he was this sensitive kid very overwhelmed by emotions. He would cry at that unhoused person in the street, cry at the chord changes in Bridge Over Troubled Water and say, turn it off, it's too sad. And his mom would say, like, whatever you're feeling is okay to feel, and you want to be a writer, like, remember these feelings. It's all grist for the mill. Everything you use is material for your work. And so as a result, I think he's created a work that's capacious enough that so many Americans and folks around the world can see parts of themselves reflected in the work, the way people often can within the prism of Shakespeare, too. And he suggested we call this book Grist for the Mill. Mm-hmm. I didn't buy it, but but I think there might be something in that sponginess or that milling ability to sort of have the whole world reflected through you.
Like a great Easter egg in the book is that even when he was in maybe middle school or high school, he was drawn to the Hamilton-Burr duel. That must have just lit your brain up. Like,
oh my God.
How is this Easter egg here in his origin story? The fact that was what would propel him into cataclysmic world domination.
Right. I'm sure you found this with Pri as well. Like, we get these sort of rosebud moments that seem like touchstones.
Right.
So this is such a canonical story for those of you who care about Lin-Manuel, that he's like on vacation from his first musical in the Heights, picks up a copy of Ron Chernow's biography of Alexander Hamilton and reads it on vacation with his wife in Mexico. And before he's finished the first chapter, he started hearing hip-hop stories in his head. That's all true, but it wasn't an accidental pickup of this book. And it turned out when he was in 10th grade, American History project, his teacher said, you can write about anything that we've studied. And for Lin-Manuel, it was always like, if he could do a creative project instead of write an essay or take an exam, that's what he was leaping out to. The only time he got above a C in math class was when his teacher let him rewrite the lyrics to Billy Joel's For the Longest Time as For the Law of Signs and invite his jazz chorus buddies in to perform it. And then they went on to the subway station with less warm reception. So for the history project, he's like, I want to make a movie. And this I also sort of didn't realize until I started researching it. He had been obsessed since he was in preschool with people who died before they could live out their promise. And his best friend in preschool, this girl named Allie, called his girlfriend. They would hold hands. They'd give each other a kiss when they'd see each other each day. And one day he wakes up and his mom is in tears and tells him that Allie is drowned in her parents' backyard. And it feels like his whole world has turned gray. And people would ask him, like, do you have a girlfriend? He would say, my girlfriend died. Mm. And then he got to high school, and his first girlfriend there was hit by a car. And he started to develop this terrible fear that anybody he loved was going to die or come to harm, and that maybe this would happen to him too, especially when he became obsessed with Rent, the musical in the 90s, and learned that Jonathan Larson, its composer, had died the night before the show opened, and he worried if this would happen to him. So he learned that there was a founding father who not only had been killed in a duel, but who had lost his own child in a duel on the very spot where he would later face Aaron Burr. And he was fascinated by this figure. And so for his 10th grade American History project, he decided he would make a movie about the Burr-Hamilton duel. And his girlfriend from high school, Meredith Somerville, had amazingly saved the script that he wrote for this duel and shared it with me. And it's all about Hamilton feeling tremendous guilt about having lost his child and sent his child into a duel, and resolving then to throw away his shot with Burr so that he didn't take another person's life. So I'm reading this, and I'm like, oh my God, this is like the heart-rending psychology of a death-obsessed adolescent writ out on the page. They couldn't make the movie because somebody jumped out and stole their video camera as they were walking to shoot it. So he turned in the screenplay, and according to his memory, Mr. Steinfink gave him a B-. Said this is a simplistic psychological explanation for a complex historical moment. And so years later, when he was writing the musical Hamilton, and his dramaturg, his producer, kept saying, like, you got to explain why Hamilton throws away a shot when he spent the whole musical saying, I'm not throwing away my shot. Mm-hmm. Lin-Manuel said all he could have in his mind was B- over and over again. Didn't want to provide an explanation, but I loved these moments where I felt like we could see a connection between the young emerging artist and the global figure he became.
Yeah, and about halfway through the book, where he does go on that vacation, he's laying in a hammock and he's reading Chernow's biography on Hamilton. Here it is, here's that springboard moment. Does he still have that original copy and all marked up and everything? And have you seen it?
He gave it to the rapper Nas.
Really?
Yes. Nas was a big influence on Lin-Manuel, a guy, who writes about his own neighborhood, Queens in Nas's case, Illmatic, in a way that dramatizes it and makes everybody able to connect with it. Nas, big influence on Sonny's raps in the Heights, and came to Hamilton and was a fan. And then they ended up collaborating. Nas was the executive producer of Lin-Manuel's latest project, concept album based on the movie The Warriors. And Lin-Manuel gave his precious copy to Nas. So it's framed in Nas's house.
Oh my gosh.
And that is a level of entry to the Mirandaverse that I have not yet been granted.
Yeah, that to me, like, I think I wrote there. I'm like, oh my God, did Daniel get to look at the book and like see the margin, like see the brain at work as he's annotating it, like, oh, here's a song. And
yes, that would be amazing.
Well, because Chernow, he's just like, when he was listening to one of the first songs that he wrote for Eliza, it was just like, you condensed the first 30, 40 pages into 2 to 3 minute song, and he was just like totally tickled by that.
Yes. Well, the relics that were amazing, and this is like, I suppose the difference between writing about Shakespeare, like, what do you have? You got his will, you've got some legal documents, you've got the scripts of the plays. With Lin-Manuel, what you have are the mixtapes. He spends most of his adolescence and even into his adult life, like, making mixes for the people that he loves. And High School Girlfriend would share me the mixtapes where he would, like, slip, in between a Les Mis song and a Far Side rap, like, hold me, kiss me, thrill me, these sort of like subliminal messages that he was sending to the recipients. Those became like, I felt like my reading quizzes for myself. Is like people just started, who went to high school and college with him, sending me the table of contents of the mixtapes that they got from Lin-Manuel. And my check would be like, okay, do I recognize each of these songs and can I explain what they're doing on this mixtape? And if I can, then I feel like I know where his brain is at this moment in this story.
And I think what really struck me about the book as well is that everyone knows him as the figure of Hamilton, the creator of Hamilton. And I was reading, just thinking, like, is Hamilton going to hijack the entire story? And the fact is, it doesn't. It comes in roughly halfway through, and then it takes a significant chunk of the second half of the book. But, like, how cognizant were you of the balance? Because most people are going to be reading this expecting basically a Hamilton treatise, but you give it the entire treatment of his entire life, and Hamilton being a significant part, it's not the entire part.
That's true. Yes, I was thrilled, of course, to find out about the stuff I didn't know beforehand. The 90s grunge jukebox musical that he wrote when he was in college.
Basket Case, right?
Exactly, right. Or Nightmare in D Major, the musical about the ghost of a fetal pig who comes back to haunt the kid who cut him up in AP biology class. And I remember that first chapter I wrote about 7th grade. I was so thrilled with it because I was like, I know everybody who's in his homeroom. I know everything he wrote that year. And my agent read it and she said, okay, the good thing is you're writing. Like, you're doing something. But are all the chapters going to be like this? And I was like, well, what's the problem? I've learned it. But she's like, we got to get to Hamilton, right? And if this is a whole chapter on 7th grade, then we're going to be, volume 3 by the time we get to the stuff we care about. And I remember my editor, when I sent in the first draft, it was 200,000 words, saying to me, Lin-Manuel Miranda is not Lyndon Baines Johnson. He does not get the 6-volume treatment yet. But I wanted to show how all of the material from the beginning informed the work of somebody who is continually learning at each point of their
It's earning
their
it,
life.
too. We want to earn. He needs to earn it in the book, and that's what we're experiencing, is that, like, he's earned this moment to get on that rocket ship we were talking about.
I hope so. And then the question my editor would ask was, like, is the book going to end with Hamilton? For me, part of the argument of the book is this is a guy who continues to learn and who wants to expand his, like, Swiss Army knife of tools at each point. And so really Hamilton is actually the springboard for the next phase of his career. He doesn't have to worry about money. He can do whatever he wants. And what he wants to learn how to do is to be a filmmaker. And that's what he sets out to do in the second part of his life, and write music for Disney films that he grew up looking at. And my early readers like, why are you writing about Disney? That doesn't matter. Some readers might feel that way, but these were mostly, I think, 75-year-olds. And I think most people who had was around kids during the pandemic, and our blood type is now basically Disney Plus as a result, knows that we don't talk about Bruno as the gateway for many people to Lin-Manuel. So I was glad to be able to show him continuing to learn too.
Right. There's a moment late in the book as Stephen Levinson asks, like, what drives you to keep going after Hamilton, frankly. And,
Right.
and Lynn's just like, because I know someday I'm going to die. And like, there it is. Like, even with this success that none of us are going to touch, quite frankly, he's still driven by the ticking clock.
Tick. Yeah, that I have to admit was alien to me. And maybe some of you feel this ticking clock more consciously than I do. I don't sort of spend each day thinking I have to maximize every moment because I don't know when I'm going to die. But that was tremendously palpable for Lin-Manuel. And it was, even his mother had grown up with it as well. She'd gotten diagnosed with cancer when she was 19 and told that either the treatment would work or she had 2 years to live. And this was sort of a mode in which I think their whole family kind of operated and not in an inhibiting way, but in a motivating way of like, your time is precious. What are you going to do with it? And so I didn't want to, I hope it's not a sort of reductive psychological reading, but it certainly seems like it was a driven part of his MO. And so when Stephen Levinson, who was the scriptwriter on Lin-Manuel's first directorial project, Tick, Tick, Boom, about Jonathan Larson, the guy who died before he could see his work into the world, told me that line, I was like, oh my God, that's what we're...
Yeah, you're just hearing it echo throughout. Like, yeah, this is some deeply embedded psychology. Like, he is driven by, like, I just need to make my mark, take my shot over and over and over again, because eventually it's going to be taken away from me, whether I like it or not. It's the only preconceived thing in his life. It's like, it's going to be taken away from me at one point or another. I'm going to make the most of it.
Right. And then that was the challenge of, like, how do you write about somebody whose life hasn't come to a complete end? Like, you begin beautifully with Prefontaine's funeral, and that's like a perfect entry point into how he lives. I had to figure out that when I interviewed Ron Chernow, his first question to me was, where are you going to end the book? Like, how's it going to land? And initially I had thought, okay, the arc is Lin-Manuel is a student, he's learning from all these people, and the end is he's going to become a teacher. And I had this scene, he went through, he was like a formal mentor sponsored by Rolex for a young filmmaker, and he invited me to an occasion where he was going to present her work at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and she had made this film about people's memories of songs from their childhood, a documentary. It included Lin-Manuel, and on this film he sings the songs that his mother, the child psychologist, used to soothe him from his childhood, and then the filmmaker had like everything dissolve into stars. And I thought, oh, well, that's the end, right? He's going to become the teacher. His student will return us to his mother in childhood, and the last word of the book is going to be stars, which is going to resonate with all the thing. And I wrote it, and I was so thrilled. I thought it was so like clever and resonant, and everybody hated it. People who had disagreed about everything else in my book, the one thing they all agreed about was a terrible ending for the book. They're like, who is this young filmmaker? We've never met him before. And why are you killing off Lin-Manuel? You're like turning him into an apotheosis in the heavens. And I thought back to Mrs. Dalloway, the Virginia Woolf novel, where somebody else dies so that Mrs. Dalloway doesn't die at the end of the book, but can be sort of reborn. And I was like, oh, that's what we need to have happen. So somebody else dies at the end of the book, and that springs Lin-Manuel into renewed action. And then he released, during the course of writing this book, he released a new album whose first and last line is, "This is the sound of something being born." And I thought, okay, you've given me something other than death. You've given me a rebirth. That's where we're going to go.
Right. And when you're talking about and building the scenes around the making of Tick, Tick, Boom, about Jonathan Larson,
yeah.
And Jonathan Larson's sister, what she appreciated about that was they didn't make it into like St. Jonathan and like showed some unflattering moments. And I wonder, just for you in terms of Lin-Manuel, what was the challenge of finding the unflattering things so it didn't feel like hagiography?
Right. Absolutely. I love this line. Jonathan Larson's sister says what she liked about the film is that it wasn't St. Johnny. And when I saw Tick, Tick, Boom, I don't know if some of you have seen it, it's on Netflix. This is, I think, delightful and wonderful illumination of an artist making work that nobody's going to see and trying to figure out how to keep going for it. And I wrote to Lin and said, I want to do for you what you did for Jonathan Larson and show him in all of his complexity, loving and learning and screwing up on the way to making work. And I think that required him to be pretty vulnerable. And he's a fairly uninhibited guy who's willing to talk about stuff, but he talked about failures in a way that I'd never heard from him before, and moments of conflict and betrayal and shame. And for me, it's not trying to have a gotcha kind of thing. Right. I feel like this is part of the education of an artist. What do you do? For instance, if your mom has told you it's all grist for the mill, everything that you experience can become your art, and then your girlfriend doesn't want her private life to become part of your art and feels like she's been put on display. That's part of your education. Or what do you do if you've learned from your high school mentors that the way to get everybody involved in a production is to make it the most fun thing possible, and you're going to lead with enthusiasm and do extra shows, and if everybody has to learn the mambo for West Side Story, you're going to call it National Mambo Week and bring in snacks and do fun warm-ups to get everybody on board. And then Hamilton opens, and all of a sudden there's a discrepancy between the money the producers are making for the show and the money that the mostly black and brown artists who have been part of its development are making for the show. And being fun is not sufficient to deal with that structural inequality. Right. So those for me, those were tough moments to talk about, but with him. But I tried to pitch him that, like, this is part of an education. And in fact, I find, I don't know if you find this too, that when you're reading about an artist you admire, what's most inspiring is actually not their highs, because you know about those already. It's how they deal with the lows, how they deal with the moments. Lin-Manuel described to me when he'd done this crazy sci-fi time travel senior thesis show and it flopped. And then the other kid who was the star senior thesis student at Wesleyan did it like the most gorgeous show that anybody had ever seen. And Lin-Manuel told me he broke down in tears in his car coming out of that show and felt like he was Aaron Burr watching Alexander Hamilton do everything that he wanted to do but couldn't accomplish himself. And I felt like those are the moments we need to have to be able to realize that we are not alone in our feelings of insecurity or inadequacy or going through those lulls as well.
Oh, for sure. What did you find was the most, maybe the thing that made him squirm the most, the hardest conversations you had to have with him?
Puerto Rico. So Lin-Manuel grew up visiting his grandparents in Puerto Rico every summer, longing to feel at home in the island his parents had come from, but always feeling out of place because he spoke Spanish with a New Yorican accent, couldn't play with the other kids, would just sort of make movies alone with his grandparents' friends. And then he thought that bringing Hamilton to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria would be a way to have the sort of homecoming that he'd never experienced as a child and that he actually had experienced with In the Heights on a touring production. He was just bringing the show there to raise money to help the island recover after the hurricane, but it became bound up in a really complex nexus of colonial economic difficulty. And Lin-Manuel had sort of put himself out on a limb at his dad's recommendation to back a financial oversight plan for Puerto Rico that gave the federal U.S. government control over the Puerto Rico's economy, led to horrible austerity measures, cuts in education on the island. And when he announced that he was going to bring Hamilton to Puerto Rico, a group of students at the university where his dad had graduated showed up with signs saying in Spanish, "Lin-Manuel, our lives are not your theater." And he told me he still felt a pit in his stomach as he was describing these moments where I think genuinely he was trying to do what he felt to be the right thing, but was part of a far more complex narrative than he understood at the time, and was putting on a musical that was about the history of federal control over state debt that was, he now acknowledges, a tricky thing about raising money for it. So I remember being at the press conference in San Juan where he was getting peppered the way a politician would with questions about, did he support this oversight board? What did he think about Trump's response to Hurricane Maria? And he starts in Spanish, and then he reverts to English, and he finally says, "I'm just a little kid who wants you to be proud of what I made." And that's a tricky position to be in. But I thought, again, that's part of your education as an artist. What happens when you become artist as citizen, artist as leader, and you have to have a megaphone that's bigger than what you anticipated.
All right, nice. Now, before we bring this plane down for a landing, I'd love to, if there's anybody in the audience who would love to ask Daniel a question, just raise your hand and I'll repeat it into the mic and have Daniel answer it. So yeah, pre-Hamilton profile, and then post-Hamilton, I guess.
It's a great question. So pre-Hamilton, I would say Lin-Manuel was the toast of Broadway. His first musical, In the Heights, opened when he was 28, won the Tony Award for Best Musical, and he stopped having to be a substitute teacher, stopped having to dance at bar mitzvahs to cover his rent, and could now be a full-time writer, and got ushered into the pantheon of writers that he had always dreamed of. So Stephen Sondheim was asking him to translate lyrics from West Side Story into Spanish for a revival, and Stephen Schwartz, composer of Wicked, was asking him to write new songs for a revival of his show. So that was a thrill to him. But beyond the 8 blocks of Times Square, he could walk, and not too many people knew who he was. And in fact, film adaptations of In the Heights got stalled out for a decade because the studios didn't think he was a bankable enough face to invest the amount of money, and they would need to turn it into a production. Then, when Hamilton hits, and it's sort of hard to remember that 2015 moment when everybody across the political spectrum is going to see it. Dick and Lynn Cheney are going to see it. George Bush is going to see it, as well as, the Clintons and the Obamas and Steven Spielberg and Oprah and Nas and every other celebrity under the sun. And everybody I talked to, who knew Lin as a kid, said he was still the same guy afterward. And part of it was that he had a newborn. His and his wife Vanessa's first child was born 2 months before Hamilton went into rehearsals. And so his wife, Vanessa, is an amazing scientist and lawyer who, as far as I can tell, totally loves her husband and is totally unimpressed with the world in which he operates. And so he would say, my God, today I met Jay-Z and we talked about flow and rap, and she would say, and I care why? Because we need milk for our kid and we need diapers at home. And so I think that sort of helped keep him grounded during that time, even as he was sort of flying in a higher echelon. And most of the people that he's tight with are still the people that he was making Clayton's friends with when he was a 16-year-old in high school. That's still his circle. And you walk through Washington Heights with him, people just sort of wave. They're like, that's our guy. Elsewhere, everybody's mobbing him for autographs. But I think that helps him stay connected to the person that he was before. And people were sort of suspicious, I think, sometimes when they read this book. It's he's a pretty nice guy. People don't have critical things to say about him. You like his work or you don't. You might find him a little extra in a sort of theater kid way, but they're not skeletons in his closet. But to me, that actually became one of the lessons of the book, is that we're sort of, I think, often internalized to think great work comes out of people who are not well socialized and who are living in agony in a garret and then come out and wreak havoc on their collaborators and are jerks, but that's the price we pay for greatness. And Lin-Manuel and his collaborators really set out to show that you could make great work, and you could make great work about toxicity and conflict and violence without inflicting it on any of your collaborators. And that seems to be the mode in which he operates.
Awesome. Any others? Yeah. And anything that you learned along the way, Daniel, that surprised you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't know about all of these shows that Lin-Manuel wrote before Hamilton. Hamilton was the 8th musical he had written by the time it opened on Broadway. And that helped for me sort of demystify the notion that you start with the meteoric work of art. You have to write 7 Minutes in Heaven, the musical about your first unchaperoned high school party. And you have to write On Borrowed Time, the time travel musical. And you have to write Bring It On, the cheerleader musical, before you can get to the glory of the Hamilton work. And I also hadn't realized how emotional the writing process is for Lin-Manuel. Maybe it's because I grew up as sort of trained as an academic, and it was a kind of more intellectual than emotional exercise. But Lin-Manuel's wife, Vanessa, says she cannot write in the same room as Lin-Manuel because he writes as an actor, and he's inhabiting the lives of his characters. So if it's a funny scene, he is cracking up, and if it's Eliza's epilogue at the end of Hamilton, he is ugly crying through boxes of tissues. And when I first heard that, I thought, oh my God, this is why I didn't hang out with theater kids in high school. That level of emotional disinhibition is alien to me. And then it actually became a kind of gift of the writing process for me. This seems sentimental to say, but I felt there were lines in this book that other people said about Lin, and when I got to them, I was cracking up hearing them on the page. And then there were moments with his grandfather and with a certain performance for Obama where like I had tears in my eyes as I was writing, which I had never had before. And so I felt like he sort of had opened up my emotional level. And I came to think of it as the like salt, fat, acid, heat approach to writing. I don't know if it's something that you adopt as well, but cribbing off of Samin Nosrat, like I felt like salt is the details. Like you need some to have flavor. Too much is going to overwhelm, and so I'd have to like keep a hand on the salt shaker. Fat is like the layers of context. You need to zoom out sometimes, but too much is going to, enrobe your story in too many layers. The acid is the humor. Whenever things are getting too mushy, you need a zinger from a collaborator. And then the heat is like the emotional stakes. What's going to keep this from just Lin's writing another song so we understand like where he is and why his whole life depends on writing this song. And I had not been playing with like the acid and the heat before I started writing this. It was all salt and fat. And so I felt like learning about his process helped sort of open up the like emotional register of my writing too.
I always love asking the guests for a recommendation of some kind for the listeners. That's just like anything you're finding fun or happy out there. And so what would you recommend for the listeners out there? Just something that's bringing you some joy that you'd like.
Well, so there's one name in the title of this book, but this book is really a love letter to all of Lin-Manuel's collaborators and like the amazing other artists that he works with in order to execute what's in his brain and bring it to life. And so one of them is the author that Ruby mentioned in the intro, amazing playwright Chiara Allegria Hudes, who wrote the script for In the Heights, won a Pulitzer Prize for her own plays, Water by the Spoonful, just a knockout writer. And she's just written her first novel, The White Hot, which is a searing, short novel about a mother who has left her daughter 10 years ago and is now writing a letter to her daughter to explain why she had to do that for her own survival. And if you can read The White Hot or listen to Daphne Rubin Vega narrating the audiobook of The White Hot, you will never forget it. So that's my recommendation.
Oh, fantastic. Well, this book is an amazing read. I implore you to get it and have it signed by Daniel. But Daniel, thank you so much for carving out time to come down to Eugene for a live recording of the podcast. The book's amazing, and you were amazing on stage today. So just thank you for the time.
It's an honor, Brendan. Thanks so much for this conversation.
Daniel, everybody. Yes, awesome. That was great. And look how timely I was to get the live podcast out just a week after its recording. What a guy. What a worker. He's a worker, man. How great was DPP? Very nice for him to come down from Portland. That hellscape of anarchy and corruption and people protesting in frog costumes. What a nightmare. Be sure you check out Pitch Club, the forever free monthly Substack newsletter thingy at Welcome to Substack. Why do I do that? I do that all the time. Welcome to pitchclub.substack.com. Idiot. And as always, visit BrendanOmero.com for updates, newsletter embed forms, Patreon, etc. The show's Instagram, as you know, at Creative Nonfiction Podcast, and Bluesky at BrendanOmero.bluesky.social or whatever. I'm at my most optimistic cue laugh track before the sun rises, mainly because I haven't eaten yet, which means I haven't given myself a chance to overeat and graze and snack and shame myself for not reaching my physical goals. I haven't been on my phone yet and thus haven't scrolled myself into psychosis. While I was walking Lachlan, whose butt issues are flaring back up, he might have a cancerous mass, but I don't want to jump to conclusions. He might need surgery. The dog that keeps on taking. Anyway, I always try and give myself a pep talk to have a good day. What would feel like a satisfying day? That when it's 7 or 8 p.m. and you look back and you say, B.O., you did all right. You did okay. I'm here to tell you that 7 out of 7 days I typically feel like shit at the end of the day because it never feels like I've made any progress or forward motion at all. Most days feel like a 3 and out with nary a first down. Run, pass, punt. And it hit me why this is, why I feel this way every single goddamn day. I don't even know what a successful day looks like. I have no definition that makes me feel like progress was ever made. As a freelancer type, it can feel or be hard to quantify what a good day is. Let's say you have a boss at at a job, at a typical 9 to 5, and you have tasks like stocking produce, there's a clear sense of accomplishment. I stacked these 10 boxes of apples, broke down the boxes, and put them in the cardboard smashing machine. Without metrics or benchmarks, it feels very much like bobbing and drifting in the ocean current. Maybe that current whisks you into a satisfying place, or just as often, maybe more so, the current carries you to false harbors or out into the boundless Black Sea. I've long sought the definition of a good day and haven't come up with anything truly satisfactory. During book research, placing, say, 10 voicemails and having 2 to 3 phone interviews and cataloging 30 to 50 articles was part of a good day. Especially the calls, because that's not passive research. That is something that I am uniquely mining from a source that isn't readily available to anybody with a newspapers.com account or a library card. I also prefer days when I can get, let's say, 50 pages of book reading done for the podcast. And that's roughly 2 hours of reading time for me. I'm pretty slow in general, but I'm also metabolizing the book differently than your average reader. I'm very active with the text. I engaged with it, taking my red pencil and underlining and circling things, writing things in the margin, and having a conversation with the writer. I like being in dialogue with it. And it's disconcerting when I am just trying to have a nice conversation with the book, and the book is like, fuck you, Brandon, fuck you. A perfect week of podcast workflow is I edit on Monday, clean the transcript on Tuesday, write my scripts on Wednesday, track the tape, create social media assets, and schedule publication on Thursday, publish and promote on Fridays. I'm not very good at promoting the backlog, but in totality, it's quite a lot of work. And 95% of my work is free labor with the hopes that it builds enough authority and goodwill and platform that it leads to people and publishers with deep pockets to give me money. Give me that money. Then there's exercise, which so often gets sidelined, but is important. I think we'd all know. If for nothing else, it's more important probably for the brain than the body. Sweat's important. Lifting the weights is important. What you're seeing here is maybe the beginning of a crystallization of maybe what defines a good day for me, perhaps. But we're also getting bombarded by fascists. We're dealing with the murder of U.S. citizens, and let us not forget the non-white slain, okay? Reading and hearing this news and, of course, bending our algorithms, so all we see is this bullshit. Sometimes a good day is just getting out of bed and making coffee or tea and somehow managing to punch the clock. A good day might be pulling your hair back in a ponytail and getting your kid on the school bus. A good day might be brushing your teeth for the first time in days or boiling a pot of water for pasta and not forgetting about it. These are bad times to have good days. And a lifetime of needing to show our worth through productivity and other metrics of optimization and hustle porn and capitalism and watching the day-to-day grift and slaughter is enough to fry our neurons into paralysis. And it could be that finding a way to define a good day is a way to seize just a little bit of control from systems, just to have some agency. Let's say I surrender to the bullshit currents and I'm swamped by the merciless waves seeking to capsize my boat. The end of the day so often feels like a failure and a loss and no way to honor those who suffer far greater ills than me. Structure helps. Time blocking's nothing new. Setting timers is nothing new. Honestly, what we don't need is a productivity time management system. We probably need to take the long view as much as possible. Stop hustling so much. I have no good answer, and that's really my answer to the conundrum. Honestly, the best thing we can do is have strong boundaries around our phones. Better phone fundamentals, which is a concept new to our times. It could be as simple as and difficult as finding an analog replacement to as many apps as possible so we can break the tether. I hate that the phone is also the podcast player and the record player because all the usual temptations are right beside the things that actually bring us nourishment. They're just a tap away. Before you know, you've wasted 90 seconds or 3 minutes over and over and over again. And again, I have no good answers, but it's all this shit that contributes to my great sense of sloth and waste come sundown. It's a constant process of refinement and reflection, and in so doing, I/we might find some satisfaction when it's sack time. So stay wild, CNFers, fuck ice, and if you can't do, interview. See ya!